My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I covered the Assange case because I like to know what is going on with Assange, and I want to keep that in the limelight. I don't want them to put him in a prison, and then no one sees or hears from him again. That would be a worst case scenario. I also think it's a worst case scenario if they bring him to trial and they are able to go after him without there being any kind of pushback, public outcry, and to pretend as if the guy either doesn't exist or to put him somewhere where people forget about him. This show should be a good one. I have with me journalist, activist, and spokeswoman Taylor Hudak, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Welcome to the Soapbox.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Taylor Hudak, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. So, I am absolutely fortunate to have you on the show. And it's funny, someone yesterday sent me an email saying, hey, what's the latest on Julian Assange? And I was like, well, you will love tomorrow's show because I have with me someone to talk about competently about what is going on with Julian Assange. So let's start here. The name, I versus Five Eyes. That's essentially the name of the organization that you are backing. Now, can you explain why that name of the organization? What does the organization essentially stand for and what does it do?
Absolutely. So the One versus Five Eye campaign is not directly tied to Julian Assange or WikiLeaks, but it addresses a very similar issue, which is taking on the intelligence agencies and specifically the Five Eyes.
I see.
So this is a So this is a campaign that was launched by journalist and activist Suzi Dawson, and she is taking on the Five Eyes. Now, the Five Eyes is an interconnected network of intelligence agencies among 5 Western countries. That includes the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, which is Suzi's country of origin. Now, Suzi, because of her work exposing the abuses of power by the intelligence agencies, she became a target of the intelligence agencies while she was living in New Zealand. And now she is in Moscow, Russia, where she is reseeking temporary asylum there. And this campaign is all about bringing awareness to her fight against them, to her journalism, and also to exposing these intelligence agencies for who they are and for the harm that they are causing so many people around this world, not just Suzi Dawson, but people like Julian Assange and people like John Kiriakou and so many others.
Yeah, the John Kiriakou thing I know a bit about, and I even know a little bit about the Suzi Dawson case. Now, how does Suzi Dawson play into this? Now, has been taking place? Why is she in Moscow?
So she is in Moscow now because she began as a activist back in 2011, and she was a key member of the Occupy Auckland and Occupy New Zealand movement. And of course, many members who were part of that movement were heavily targeted by the intelligence communities. And Suzi started to realize that the mainstream media and the corporate media was not covering these protests and these movements, and they were very effective. So she took it upon herself to become a journalist and started to cover these issues. And as she started to dig more into this, she started to realize that U.S. intelligence agencies were operating on New Zealand soil, on a foreign country's soil. And she thought, well, what right do they have to be there? And legitimately so. What right do they have to be there? And so she started to look further into this, and she produced some fantastic work. And her work was also widely recognized by Julian Assange and circulated by him on Twitter when he was still active on Twitter. And her involvement, of course, with high-profile figures such as Kim.com, Julian Assange, and others that caused the intelligence agencies to really target her even further. Now, the targeting became so severe that Suzi had no choice but to leave her home country. And it is not just Suzi, like I said, that this happened to. This happens to many political dissidents, activists, whistleblowers, and journalists around the world.
Just so the audience is clear, give an example. Why does she believe that they're targeting her? Like, what's the specific thing that happened where she says, okay, or for that matter, multiple things. I mean, because ultimately, one thing can kind of be explained away as, okay, this is just an anomaly. Maybe this doesn't necessarily apply. But if there are multiple things, then at a certain point, it's not necessarily just, I can't chalk this up to a coincidence. Why? Why does she believe that she's being targeted? What are the specific instances that gave her that point of view?
Okay, so I will first begin by encouraging everybody to please check out her documentary, A Diary of a Person of Interest. She goes in depth explaining exactly what had happened to her. And I'm glad that you do bring up the point saying that, was it a multitude of things or just one thing here and there? Let me put this into perspective. Her Russian asylum attorney put it best when he said that any one thing that Suzi has experienced can be explained another way, but all of it
Yeah.
cannot be.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, this one is somewhat of a coincidence, but the fact when it keeps happening over and over and over and over again, at a certain point, it's like, okay, there may be something to this.
Right. And also, I do want to make note, too, that the targeting began less severe. And then over time, as she continued to go on with her work and they began to realize that she wasn't going to stop, the targeting became more severe and it did escalate to becoming threats on her life. So it is extremely serious. But like I said earlier, I do encourage everybody to check out her documentary where she explains in her own words exactly what happened to her.
Yeah.
Now, Suzi did seek redress in New Zealand. She went to the police and told them what she was experiencing. And they told her, as long as you're an activist and continue to do this, you will continue to be targeted. And this will continue to happen to you. That's what they told her.
Essentially, as long as you're involved, you're fair game.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yes.
I am not shocked in the least that U.S. intelligence is working on foreign soil. I think at this point, most of people would say, of course. I don't think they would be, like put off by that in the sense of being stunned by that. I remember I was in Kenya and I was talking to my Uber driver, and the guy tells me, he says, I have friends of mine that are in the U.S. military. It's like, how do you have friends, meaning Kenyans, that are a part of the U.S. military? He says, I can take you to the recruitment center where they hire our friends, a country that is poor and essentially pays them to go out and do horrible things in other countries. I'm not shocked in the least that the intelligence services will be active in other countries. And I've seen parts of Suzi's story. She has it on YouTube. Part of it is on YouTube where she was kind of keeping diary stories about it. So I do suggest, take a look at it and people can judge for themselves.
And also, she documented on social media as this was happening to her. She was posting and taking photographs for evidence.
Yes.
To show that, all of these things were happening to her and that she is being severely targeted. And one interesting point, too, is that another activist in the United States was experiencing the same exact forms of targeting to her in a different country on the other side of the world. So this shows the real interconnectedness of these intelligence agencies, because again, this campaign is all about taking on the Five Eyes, which is an interconnected network of intelligence agencies among 5 Western countries.
I think one of the more interesting parts to this has to do with the U.S. influence. I mean, because ultimately what you're talking about is influence that the U.S. has in the various countries across the globe, especially from the standpoint of Western powers. And when you look at the Assange case, I think you can see it in more blunt terms. I mean, even the taking of the ship from Iran, and I know this gets slightly off of intelligence, but we're still just talking about, for the most part, just influence. This ability of one country to influence other nations and get them to essentially fold within a power structure. So a British ship takes an Iranian ship off the coast of Spain as if that's somehow British territory. You have the thing with Assange where he seeks refuge because one of the other Western countries allows an accusation of rape, in which case he says this is political persecution, which he was right, by the way, I believe it. And he goes into an embassy for refuge, and the British government, hound him for all of those years, and despite the United Nations saying, let him go, the British government refuses to let him go. Would this be a case of that? Meaning, would this fold within the context of what we're talking about here in regards to influence in other countries?
I would say so, yes. Because, of course, with the Assange case, the United States, of course, is, um, requesting that he be extradited to the U.S. to face these charges. But, of course, the United States has put immense pressure on England, on Sweden,
Ecuador?
and yes, Ecuador. That could be an entire other video.
Yes.
There is, it really could. We could spend hours literally talking about all of that. But the United States has an enormous amount of power in this world, and oftentimes, sadly, it is not for the betterment of these countries. These countries who are a part of these Five Eyes partnerships agreements pay dearly for that. And oftentimes their human rights are being violated. They're being subjected to austerity measures. So taking or signing these partnership agreements does not benefit these countries at all. And Suzi does go in depth explaining exactly how that is. And it's really the United States abusing its power because we are living in an American empire.
I'm being told that the video is choppy. I'm keeping a copy of this, guys, so I can re-upload the copy afterwards, just in case um, the system is not accommodating it all that well. Right. Can you give a update or an overview of what is taking place from the standpoint of Assange right now? I know he's in Belmarsh prison, and I've been reading some of the stories that have been coming out from some of the journalists that had the opportunity to talk to him. Not, I want to say Murray, but it's not Craig Murray. It's another gentleman that has been looking into this. For some reason, I always mix these two up. But am I right? Is it Murray?
John Pilger, I believe,
That's
has
it,
met
John
with
Pilger.
him.
For some
Yes.
reason, I keep mixing those two up. I can see
Mm-hmm.
him in my head. I literally can see the guy. Pilger has been talking to Assange. Pilger has come back essentially saying this is a travesty of justice. His health is declining while he's in that Belmarsh prison. And notions of the rule of law seem to be a bit dodgy. Can you give an update on what is taking place right now with Assange?
Absolutely. So Julian is in Belmarsh prison. We are not 100% clear where he is residing within the prison. We are not 100% sure if he is still in the medical unit or if he is living among the rest of the population. I don't want to assume either way because it's really unclear. Basically, his contact with the outside world is severely limited. His ability to prepare his own defense is basically non-existent, and he hasn't been able to really communicate with his attorneys. And he was just recently in court, physically in court, on Monday, October 21st, for a hearing. And during this hearing, we were provided with some pretty disturbing news regarding Julian Assange's demeanor and his physical appearance. Craig Murray, who was present in the courtroom, I believe, wrote an article, and he said that Julian exhibited signs of torture, that he also lost even more weight. I believe it's up to 10 kilos now.
Oh, wow.
And yes, quite a bit.
That's
And
20,
also, he was
over 20 pounds per
unable.
audience.
He was unable to even provide his date of birth. And if you think about that, that is something that anybody could really just say right off the top of their head, of course. I mean, it's something that you're repeating your entire life. And this is somebody who was so sharp, who was so bright, who couldn't even say their birthday, which is really disturbing to all of us who are involved in this fight to free Julian Assange. And in addition to all of this, too, when he was asked if he understood what was taking place during the court proceeding, he said that he did not understand. And the magistrate, Vanessa Baratzer, said, "Oh, your lawyers will explain it to you." Well, that's not how it works. He has to know and be aware of what is taking place during these court proceedings. That is his right. So his rights, of course, are being violated. That is nothing new. But even during this extradition process, his rights are being further trampled on, really. And there was actually just recently a concert and a rally that took place in the UK in central London outside the Home Office. And MIA was there. Sreko Horvat was there. Vivienne Westwood. and Julian's father and also Julian's cousin was there. And Julian was aware, I believe, that this event was taking place, which is really good to know because I'm sure it did lift his spirits in that moment. But his dad said that he was thankful that everybody gathered for him. But I encourage everybody to check out that footage because it's really remarkable to see, celebrities really speaking about free speech and performing for Julian Assange and to bring awareness to his case. It was really quite powerful to see. So there's still so much hope in this case, and I encourage everybody to really get involved and to become a vocal advocate for Julian Assange because our politicians aren't going to do it. It's on us now. And that's similar to the 1 versus 5i campaign as well. It is on us, the people on the ground, to bring awareness to what these intelligence agencies continue to do to people who are activists, who are political dissidents, who are just journalists trying to expose wrongdoing. And we need to stand up.
Let me ask you this. Why do you think the journalists in America take the tint that they do? I often say either they're incompetent or they're complicit. Ultimately, they're trying to get this guy for espionage laws. He's a journalist. He publishes the content. Why do you believe that they, for the most part, turn a blind eye to something that could put them on the firing line themselves?
Well, because they are obviously run by corporations. These people are part of the mainstream media, and there are serious consequences for them if they were to speak out in favor of Julian Assange. However, that is not at all to provide them an excuse for not speaking out for Julian Assange. Now, Suzi Dawson has spoken about this quite a bit, and this is interesting, is that we know that the intelligence agencies have infiltrated every aspect of human society. One of those aspects is our media and our information. And you have to wonder if you turn on, why when you turn on corporate media, you see ex-CIA or ex-FBI speaking on CNN or MSNBC or Fox. What qualifications does that individual have to be in the media? And their only reason for being there is because they have infiltrated every aspect of our society and they are controlling the message.
Interesting. Do you think this is, from a standpoint of controlling the message, more about them in the sense of a group think or a specific concerted effort? If you understand what I'm asking?
Yes, I think this is a specific concerted effort to squash and to silence anybody who challenges the mainstream narrative and acceptable point of view that the establishments and the powers that be want to be further disseminated. That's what this is all about.
And media is complicit in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The media is completely compromised. Completely compromised. They're infiltrated by CIA. We know that Anderson Cooper is ex-CIA.
I did not know that.
Yes. And also, by the way, for the viewers too, there is no such thing as ex-CIA or ex-FBI. They are still very much a part of that inner circle.
It's funny. I heard the same things about like MI6. It's like there's no such thing as ex-MI6.
There isn't, right?
If somebody's done a job. Like, for example, to bolster your point for the moment, I don't know if I accept the entire premise, but to bolster the point, initiative, the statecraft aid, the thing that just was released in 2018, but the supposedly charity that is putting out information based and being paid by the British government, by the British taxpayers, to attack Corbyn, and not just attack Corbyn, to put out information related to a particular narrative that they want out, including taking down elements in other countries. I think one was in Spain that they didn't like the guy, and they had all of these proxies in the various areas to put out news and information that would attack or go after people who they didn't particularly like. Did you see this? This was it was called like the Institute of Statecraft or Intelligence Initiative or something to that effect.
It sounds very familiar. I'm not 100% up to date on that specific instance that you're referring to.
But it bolsters your point. That's what I'm getting at.
Exactly. I was going to say, it sounds like what I was just saying
like
earlier.
A little small organization that calls himself a charity, supposedly backed in Scotland, But the guy is in the UK, and his job, what he's been doing, is putting out and disseminating information to go against people who he didn't particularly like, paid by the British government. And many of the tweets and many of the things he was putting out was attacking Corbyn. Utterly fascinating.
It is. And it's also terrifying. And to go back to politicians and to maybe touch on elections as well. Unfortunately, what we've learned through Suzi's work is that this entire election process that we have is really just political theater. We hear that phrase being thrown out a lot, but honestly, that's exactly what's taking place. It is the intelligence communities and the intelligence agencies that run all of that. And it's happening behind the scenes. These people who are in control of everything, who are part of these agencies, we don't know their names. We don't know their faces. We've never seen them before. We've never heard their names, like I said. And we can't vote them into office, and we can't vote them out. They are aware of this, and so they abuse their power. They're there forever, and they are able to control everything. And so what we can do, and I want to make this point, is we can vote against them with our dollars. And the way we can do that is by donating to Suzi's campaign. And you could do so by visiting oneversus5i.com/donate. And I know that everybody is not able to donate, of course, because we're in a pretty difficult time economically. Holiday season is approaching as well. But even just circulating that link is very helpful, because this fight against the Five Eyes impacts all of us, because it is not just the activists and journalists who are being targeted. Sure, they are to a greater extent. It is everybody. And we know that mass surveillance within the past 20 years has increased dramatically, and there is no reason to believe that it's going to stop. The only way that it's going to stop is if we on the ground take some initiative, and you could do so by donating to her campaign.
So you believe that the election itself, the entirety of the election itself, is being I agree part of it. I mean, it is true that part of it is political theater. But you don't believe that, and maybe I'm asking this question as a weird way, and I'm asking it in a way that frames it in the way I think of it, so don't misunderstand me. I know I'm framing it in a particular way. That cash has more to do with the reason why politicians or the people act the way they do, as opposed to intelligence.
I absolutely agree that money in politics is a big problem. And whenever I see a candidate that is, taking corporate money, that is a huge red flag to me. And I'm not going to support somebody like that. And I encourage others to not do so either. However, I still believe that behind it all, it is the intelligence agencies that have the ultimate power and control. That's absolutely what I believe. And Suzi has highlighted this in greater depth throughout her work and on her YouTube channel as well. But I do think that, of course, money in politics is not a good thing, and it has some influence.
What about
But
Trump? What about Trump? Because to your point, and to bolster the point, Trump gets elected, and all of a sudden, all of this stuff gets leaked out of him. Meaning, he says, I want to leave, let's say, Afghanistan and Syria. I don't want to be over there. Or I want to do X or I want to do Y. And all of a sudden, information is coming out to attack Trump. Does that add to your point that there are elements within the intelligence services that has a point of view? And when that point of view is being either bucked or transcended, let's say, then stuff comes out in order to hurt the person who has that point of view. Now, this is not a rah-rah Trump, so I don't want to make that case. But I don't want to be in Syria, meaning I don't want our uniforms to be in Syria, nor do I want us to be in Afghanistan, and I don't think necessarily we did the best in the Middle East. By the same token, the moment that the president says, let's get us out, all of a sudden, information is coming out to hit the president. Even getting into the race, by the way, when Trump was running, the information coming out in order to ding Trump seems to be coming from a particular area. When you say intelligence, what agencies are you talking about? Are you talking about like the FBI, CIA, or just the alphabet soup of intelligence and the point of view that they have?
so their main point of view is to continue the military industrial complex and to keep us at war. So I'm glad that you brought up that point about the war effort, because that's inherently interconnected to all of this as well. When I say intelligence agencies, I am referring to all of the agencies that are a part of the Five Eyes. That
Okay.
includes several, so that does include the CIA, the FBI, and many others from different countries. That includes the GCSB in New Zealand, MI6 in England, and in various other ones. But to just be clear here, yes, when I am saying intelligence agencies, I am speaking of the ones that are a part of that Five Eyes agreement. And again, the Five Eyes, the reason it's five, it just means that five Western countries have signed partnership agreements.
What do you believe the ultimate point is, or the ultimate goal?
Of the Five Eyes,
Yes, because
I believe,
nothing ever stays as it is, right? I mean, most of the time these things kind of evolve. You noted yourself that surveillance in the various countries have spiked. Even in the UK, where they were pretty much, the entire thing is surveilled. Even in DC, they have these kind of cameras that are on these parking lots, and even in the various states and cities in Richmond, the little doorbell thing that has a little camera on the doorbell. There
mm-hmm.
stories have come out showing that the police force has been working with this organization in order to keep track of essentially the various things that are going through the neighborhood as they're watching through that device. Ultimately, we've allowed ourselves to be surveilled. So the question becomes, what's the ultimate point? Or is there one?
I think there is one. I think the ultimate point is to have further control over our society. I know I've been reiterating that quite a bit on the show today, but I think that they already have a great amount of control, or I know that they do. I think that they want to continue to control people. And also, this is where it gets very sort of evil in a way, is that there's also a profit motive behind this.
Yeah.
They have basically monetized intelligence and data collection. And basically, the best way to describe this, and Suzi does a great job of explaining this with the reverse wedding cake, which means that at the very top of the wedding of the, or reversed or inverted pyramid, reverse wedding cake, she refers to this model as both of those. At the very top, the widest section is the NSA, and the NSA has all of the control. And basically, it just collects all the data from the countries beneath it that sign these partnership agreements, and then filters back down that information, or the relevant information, to these various countries. Not all of it, though, just what the NSA feels that these countries should be aware of. Now, to take it a step further and to answer your question, you may be asking, okay, well, what information, why would the NSA be giving information to other, entities? And that's because the NSA is ultimately controlled by its customers. Its customers could be a private company, it could be a department within the government, a government agency, it could be anybody. And those customers ultimately control the NSA. And if your viewers are interested in learning more about that aspect of all of this, I encourage them to definitely go to Suzi's YouTube channel, which is Suzi 3D. She discusses that in greater depth, exactly how that works. But I think that the main point here is to not only make money, but to continue controlling people, and then also to control the message and the information that's being provided to people. And they do that by targeting people and basically ruining the lives of those who challenge the mainstream narrative.
I do think there's a concerted effort to control narratives. You can see it with the Trump and Russia stuff, or Russiagate. You can see it
Yes.
with the Squirtle poisoning, where where it seems to be a very specific perspective that they wanted people to have, and anybody that bucked that perspective, they were shocked or chagrined that they were doing so. Um, Now, when I say they, though, I'm talking more so in terms of how media and the point of view that media has in this kind of notion that we don't want to breach our point of view. By the same token, media seems to be complicit with government action. I mean, they seem to be stenographers. Whatever the government says, media for the most part goes along with it, especially if they agree with the narrative. So on that specific point, I do agree with you. What action do you believe, legitimately so, challenges what you would consider to be Five Eyes? And I would even ask this in the context of Assange, right? I mean, be it protests, be it pushback in a sense of journalism or real journalism, like what's the significant action that people can take in order to create, I guess, a groundswell of support in this particular field?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So basically, I would encourage everybody to engage in decentralized activism. And what that means, it means activism that is organized, but not so organized to the point where there's like a structure, where there's somebody that's in charge and the leader of the group. And that is because that is the best way to prevent infiltration from government agencies. And that's what we really emphasize with my organization, which I co-founded alongside Andrew Smith, which is Action for Assange. And what we do is we basically go out to our communities, and we go to like busy locations in our hometowns, and we post signs that say just brief and easy to understand messages like free Assange, free Chelsea Manning, journalism is not a crime. And then recently, to build off of those efforts, I also included the One versus Five I campaign in this as well, where I handed out and posted flyers for the One versus Five I campaign.
Something
And
like
just,
Occupy Wall Street.
yes, decentralized activism is the key here, because we do not want people infiltrating and trying to cause any chaos or try to divide and conquer the organization.
Well, Occupy Wall Street fizzled out, though. I mean, I understand the decentralized thing, and I get it. Is it possible to have one decentralized structure to be overtaken and infiltrated, which ends up attacking the other structures? I guess what I'm getting at is, if anything takes place, doesn't that require structure, almost like a military campaign and trying to get something accomplished, as opposed to a kumbaya decentralized thing? So, for example, the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement wasn't decentralized. You had people who were figureheads that was going for very specific action that they wanted to take. The labor unions, same thing. When they were trying to get workers' rights, they went into this notion of unions and so forth, and then trying to kind of change events. What do you have to point to that gets with this notion of a decentralized structure that makes changes?
Well, I would first argue that with the decentralized activism, and in addition to that, you can't just have an organization that's loosely affiliated. You also have to be educated on how the infiltration process works and how human intelligence works as well, and the targeting tactics, so you understand and you could pinpoint it and see it before it could actually impact you. So, for example, we've been discussing on the One versus Five I campaigns, teach-ins that are held every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Suzi, Dawson, and Lissa Johnson, who is a psychologist, they've been discussing for the past 2 weeks, and they will continue the discussion this upcoming week on Sunday. They've been talking about JTRIG, which is basically all about the methods that are used to target people online, harass them, spread misinformation, spread smears about them, and try to ruin their reputation, and also try to deter them from engaging in further activism. They explain how all of that works and what the signs are and exactly why they do this, how they do this, etc. So having that information is also key. So it's not just about being able to put together an organization that is decentralized and that really does allow for some positive change to take place, but also being educated on what doesn't work, what does work, and also, like I said, how these intelligence agencies try to manipulate and try to infiltrate these groups. Because the one advantage that we all have is that they're all trained by the same people. These human intelligence operatives are all trained in the same way. They're all given the same manual. So their tactics aren't difficult to spot. You just have to be aware of it, and you have to be educated about it. And if your viewers are interested in that, and I highly encourage them to check it out, do subscribe to Suzi's YouTube channel, which is Suzi 3D, and do check out her teach-ins, which are held every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is U.S. time. So education is key here.
Can you name one decentralized system as opposed to the organized systems that I mentioned that has been able to get political concessions?
Um, well, I cannot name one specifically, but I can say that the Occupy movement was effective and was impactful. Sure, it did eventually fizzle out, but while still very present, there was still it was still effective. And I think that it is better to be decentralized than to be hyper organized and to have a structure that's easy to pinpoint and easy to infiltrate. So just because there's not necessarily an exact group that I can name right this second that has been a model of decentralized activism, doesn't mean that that is not the best model to follow.
That's fair.
And
No,
thank
that's
you.
fair.
Yeah. So, and Suzi has talked about this as well. And I think that she's an activist that everybody should really look to for advice and for pointers on how to be effective and how to avoid infiltration and avoid having your organization really be brought to the ground. So I think at this time, right now, based off of all the information that we have gathered, decentralized activism is the best and most effective method.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. I fair enough. Okay. Fair enough. I think we're going to disagree on that one.
Okay, that's okay.
I
That's
agree
okay.
that Occupy Wall Street was effective, especially this notion of the one versus like the 1% or the 99%. And I even agree that movements are one of those things that kind of push society along, especially putting pressure on the political space and that type of thing. So that's fair. I, I in my I just have this notion of I look back to the what was it the Black Panthers, for example, the split that took place in that group and how those groups were being infiltrated. Even the civil rights groups were being infiltrated to
They
some
were.
degree.
You're right. They exactly that time period of our his yes, infiltration was taking place back then with Operation
COINTELPRO.
Mockingbird. Yes,
Well,
yeah,
Mockingbird
all of
brought over the Germans into the United States, but COINTELPRO was massive in regards to the this the thing influencing the American population. And by the way, to back up your point, even on that, that's a really good example because part of the CIA's operation was, can we influence the public perspective by essentially paying off various leaders within the society, or like you said, news crews and these other things to influence the Americans' opinion? Yeah, you're right. And the even the statecraft thing that is taking place in the UK is a really good example of that, where we're supposed to be pushing back against foreign propaganda. Or the thing that Obama signed in, the what is it called? The essentially the Ministry of Truth. Now they say it purely from the standpoint of, well, we're trying to push back on propaganda, but again, ultimately, your propaganda that you're trying to push back on is somebody else potentially truth. You know, so I don't
mhm.
entirely disagree with you. I agree with you that we have concerns from the standpoint of the influence that either intelligence or political actors have in the sense of setting and try to maintain a narrative. Even what's taking place right now in the sense of the way they're going after Twitter and Facebook, the way they brought these guys to Congress and browbeat these guys. Why do you let opinions that we don't particularly like go on your network? And it's not racist or bigoted or nothing like that, but just basic opinions that push back against the narrative. The chemical attacks in Syria, the Trump and Russia nonsense, the Skripal attacks. I mean, and that's just in the United States and in the UK. There was a persistent goal of setting a narrative and ignoring and pushing back on people who were pushing back against their narrative. So I don't want you to think that I entirely disagree with you. I actually agree with a lot of your premise. I honestly do. Is there anything that you would want to get across that you haven't mentioned